Hello friends, welcome to episode 72 of Storyteller Conclave. This is a show all about helping you run the best tabletop role-playing game that you can. Whether you're a new storyteller or dungeon master learning the craft, or an experienced storyteller looking to take your game to the next level. I am Sarah.
And I'm Rob.
How we doing, Rob?
Holy Lord.
Today has been a bit of an ordeal, has it not?
Oh, man, if it wasn't one thing, it was literally another.
So, for those of you who listen to the show pre-recorded and don't listen to it live on mixlr.com, we basically just got power back, 40 minutes ago?
I don't even think it was that much.
Yeah, maybe 20 minutes ago, something like that.
I think it was a half an hour ago. Let's go with a half hour.
It was real tight, though.
Yeah.
And we were not certain we were going to be able to record the show.
Yeah. If you work for DTE, thank you. You did a great job.
Yep.
So we got our power back. We're back online. We're here. We're live. I actually got the pre-show started, so I'm a little, and that wasn't even the day. There was all work stuff and all kinds of other things that went along with it. So, but I'm here. I'm here for Wednesday night therapy.
Now, on the upswing, I have sitting right here in front of me. In fact, I'm fanning through them for the first time right now.
Yes.
The Adventurer's Tarot.
Yeah, this is by Weird Works LLC. It was a Kickstarter that was produced and a bit over a year ago, I want to say, not by much. And basically their initial plan was to make an alternative to Initiative for 5th edition. And so they produced a deck. Now, this isn't like a tarot deck, although it has similar qualities in many ways. It actually has 105 cards in it. It's got quite a bit.
It is a chunky boy.
It is a chunky boy, and it is very pretty. And it is done. It is
gold. There's gold foil inlays on them.
And the cards are a good size too.
The artwork is gorgeous.
Yeah.
So it's funny though that these came in coincidentally today.
Yes. When we were talking about alternatives.
Yeah, alternatives to dice.
And it is very much alternative. We'll get to it. We'll talk about it.
I had a funny conversation with someone earlier.
Sure.
So I'd mentioned I'd gotten back into started playing Eve Echoes.
Oh, that's right.
The mobile version of Eve Online, and so the leader of my corporation, he's a listener of the show. And is also a big gamer himself and stuff like that. We'll banter about gaming while we're playing Eve.
We appreciate that you stopped playing with your spreadsheets long enough to join our show. So.
They're diet spreadsheets.
This
is a mobile game.
Yes.
But he mentioned to me earlier. He says don't ever let my wife hear this show though. He says because if she finds out that there are alternatives to dice, that it's not necessary to play role playing games, I'm going to be in big trouble. And I said, whoa, hold the phone. What do you mean you're going to be in big trouble? And he's like, I may or may not have spent 4 digits on dice at Dragon Con last year.
4 digits on dice is a lot of dice, or some very expensive dice, which I've seen. I've seen some very expensive dice. I've also seen some very expensive dice holders and bags, and I'm trying to think of the people who do the really nice wooden magnetic enclosures. Wormwood. They make some beautiful pieces.
Wormwood has some
not to say they couldn't send some our way if they wanted to sponsor us or something like that.
Well, I did actually say to I was like, this is actually all the reason you should be using alternatives to dice. I said because it's hard to spend $1,000 on something that is just a Jenga. If I just spend 4 digits on a Jenga tower, he's like, I don't know, I could get that, fine, Tibetan mahogany, Jenga tower. And I'm like, actually come to think of it, I'm sure Wormwood has one of those.
I am certain that either Wormwood or the guys who build those epic tables. Is that still Wormwood?
It's still Wormwood. Wormwood does...
Because it's Wormwood. There's somebody else who's involved in that stuff who makes really crazy stuff, like boxes and stuff that isn't Wormwood. I'm trying to remember who they are.
Oh, I'm sure there's a couple companies.
But either way, those guys, I mean, they get some crazy different types of wood.
Oh, they do, yeah. If you take your hobby seriously and you want to spend that kind of money on it, then, by all means. I mean, hey, look. You and I are going to hem and haw about this a little bit because, those price tags are pretty respectable.
No. But do not get me wrong.
Holy cow! There have been a couple times where I'm looking at this price tag, going, maybe.
Oh no! I fully will be ordering a Wormwood table once I get the basement done, and we can actually get together without full environmental suits.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I miss getting together with my folks.
Yeah.
And having a nice handcrafted quality table that's literally designed for the art is something to be said. Mm-hmm. But we're talking about alternatives here.
We are.
Yes.
We are.
And we are not going to say on open mic that you could play 5th edition or any D&D game without dice, because that would be rude to your friend.
That would be extraordinary.
So we're not saying that. And honestly, it would be a little challenging, I think, doing a full tactical game that way.
Elderwood,
thank you.
Elderwood
thank
is
you.
the name.
Elderwood,
thank you very much, Vicky.
Yes. But anyways, the systems that we've talked about Jenga towers, we've talked about cards, we've talked about LARPing and using your hands, but we've never really done a show on it, and so this kind of fills in that gap to kind of help you guys find what might be different. I mean, because you never know, you may find yourself camping with friends, you may find yourself in a hotel room because power went out and the convention's closed or whatever, and people are saying, hey, can you run a game? And you go, I don't have dice. You might not need them.
No, you might not need them.
So let's talk about when you won't need them, or how that even works.
Sure.
Because I think you can technically do anything with anything, but unless you understand kind of the mechanics of what it's really meaning, you could really lose out on having a quality game. Because there's some things to think about. There's definitely some considerations to make.
There is, and
you put out some really good ones just in our chat over dinner that I didn't fully admit to thinking about when it came up. I was like, oh yeah, I could do it this way, and then you were like, yeah, but it adds this. I'm like, oh, okay, so theme does have a lot to do with it. Shit.
Yeah, so I think there's two big considerations, and that's like the kind of the theme, the feel of what it adds to the game,
right?
But also the math behind it. So I mean, here's your on the top warning. Warning: this show will contain at least a little discussion of math.
Yes,
because we're talking about probability and randomization.
Yes,
and that does involve a little bit of math. Now, we're going to be crunching numbers on the air, but, a little bit of discussion about how those systems work and why you would want to use an alternate dice system or an alternative to a dice system, and how that changes how probability outcomes happen.
Yes.
Is very important to the discussion. So first off, let's talk about just some game systems that use alternate dice systems.
Okay.
So I think we got two categories that we were able to kind of break these down into, and those were partial replacements, or they use weird versions of dice.
Sure.
In systems that are entirely without dice.
Yes, because and I'll put this out there early because we did bring it up that 7C does have an alternative to dice, but it is only in character creation that they express that, and it's to help you with backgrounds and hubrises and virtues and figure out who you are and where you came from.
Right.
So we're not going into that because character creation is a whole other topic. We might do a show on that includes those elements, but we're not going to get into those. We're just talking about using it in the, shall we say, day-to-day, scenario-to-scenario, episode-to-episode.
Yeah, in the actual course of gameplay.
Yeah, whether it's combat, whether it's social, whatever it may be.
So first on our list was Savage Worlds.
Yes.
Now Savage Worlds uses an interesting. It's like just a little bit of everything. So it uses dice.
It does.
But it also uses cards, like a deck of playing cards for specifically initiative, which I thought was really interesting. So that kind of mixes things up, and it also adds an interesting dimension where not only do you have a hierarchy of numbers, but you've also got a hierarchy of suits.
Yes.
And then jokers are essentially critical successes on initiative.
Nice.
And allow you to basically insert yourself wherever you want. Even interrupting someone, someone's play. Like, okay, well, he's going to raise a gun and he's going to shoot your friend. Well, no, he's not, because I'm actually going to go before him now.
Is this it's like the John Wick moment where you, move the gun and it fires off in another direction kind of thing? You're actually inserting, you're like, no.
Yep.
I got a little speed on you.
Yep.
Okay.
And it also uses chips of tokens or some sort of thing like that. Very much akin to, Fate's Fate Points or...
Drama
dice.
Yeah.
And they're called bennies. Short for benefits, obviously.
Yep.
In Savage Worlds. So you're gonna get a little bit of everything in that. Fate, I just mentioned. Fate traditionally uses 6-sided dice, but does not use your traditional 1 through 6 d6. The fate dice are 4 6-sided dice that have 2 pluses, 2 minuses, and 2 blank slots.
I had to make my own fate dice.
Uh-huh.
For the one game that we played. They were terrible because I am not an artist, and basically it looked like worse than a child with a crayon, I think, is the best way I could put that. But they were fast. They were fast. But they got the job done, needless to say.
Yep.
So.
We actually got some blank-faced dice as well. And I was trying to do some things with ink on them. And then Sean actually has access to a laser.
Yeah,
for
etching.
Of that.
Nice.
At work, and so he did some interesting things with that as well.
Good to know. Good to know.
So Fantasy Flight Games is actually well known for doing weird-ass dice. There was 2 games right off the top of my head, and I stopped looking after 2 because it's not really...
Yes.
The topic tonight isn't about that.
Correct.
But Legend of the Five Rings, as well as the new Star Wars tabletop role-playing game, use traditionally sided dice with their own set of symbols on them.
Right.
So again, I don't know what those symbols are. They're just symbols.
Yeah.
So in the course of the game, you may roll a certain number of dice. If they show up, they'll indicate maybe you had a success, but with consequence. They might indicate an extraordinary success. They might indicate no success at all. But depending on what the game calls for, those are the dice you roll. They're not your traditional 1 through 12s.
Yeah, and I know I went looking for it and I couldn't find it. But there is a game that uses, and I can't remember what the dice are called, but basically they're 6-sided dice, but instead of having the traditional numbers on it, you have 6 dice, 2 sets of each of these, and like the first 2 sets of dice basically have 1, 5, and 1, 5, and 4 on it. Then the next set of dice, one side is 2s, and then there's 1, 6, and 4s, and then the last set of dice has 3 6s and the rest are 3 1s.
Weird.
Yeah, and the idea is that you use those at different times, but you have to combine them.
Okay.
So you always have to pick 3 dice, and you can never have 2 from the same set.
Huh.
So. Or more than 2 from the same, basically. So the whole idea is that, so I may grab, and then once they're used, they're done for that scene until, this reset moment. So basically, they're weighted dice, but you might have critical failures more often on certain sets, and clearly you're not going to hit your numbers on others.
It skews the probability really weird, yeah.
Really hard. Hard. But it still creates a level of fate to it, so... Yeah.
Samantha in the live chat says Genesis uses weird dice. I don't know that I know Genesis.
I'm not sure. Another system to look up. All right.
Who publishes Genesis? Can you tell us in the live chat, please? Thank you.
Yeah, we'll come back.
All right. So we discussed a little bit about games that use some sort of alternate systems, but aren't completely ones. Now, what are ones that are entirely diceless?
Well, you speak of Dread right off the bat.
Oh, Dread immediately.
Yeah, again, we brought it up multiple times. I have yet to play it, mainly just because I'm not into that level of suspense for my games traditionally. But although I will flat out say there was a surgery game that I did not think was going to be that big of a thing. I watched a little bit of it, and they used the Dread Jenga system for a surgery game.
Oh, surprise, Genesis is a Fantasy Flight game.
Of course it is. Of course it is. Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
Sorry, surgery.
But anyways, so they used the Jenga tower for it. So basically, it was called field hospital.
Okay.
And everybody was either a surgeon or an assistant.
Okay.
So as they did things, they had to pull from the tower, and is the patient going to live or die?
Oh, so the more things you do, the more chance.
Exactly.
Gotcha.
And apparently someone also did it as an adjunct. They were playing a normal game, but they had an airship that was under attack, and every time it took damage, someone had to pull from the tower because they were fixing it or keeping it going.
Okay.
If it fell, it meant that it was falling from the sky.
Right.
And they couldn't repair it, and that person was critically injured.
That's a great system.
So it was an adjunct to something else, so I think you could totally throw it in, but continue, please.
Oh, absolutely. So, Dread uses it very fatally.
Yeah.
Where if the tower falls, last person to touch it is removed from the story. Either they die, they go insane, they're crippled, whatever. But
Yeah.
and then it gets rebuilt. You pull some blocks, and you continue play without that person.
Yep. So it's a very tight game.
It's a survival horror mechanic.
Yeah,
at that point.
and technically with something like that, you could play it anywhere. So as long as you got a flat surface in the Jenga, why not? Right? And honestly, Jenga's not that big of a box to carry around.
It's not. And I think you can pick one up for, what, $10, $15?
Yeah, so even if you were on the road and you're like, hey, your friends are like, hey, I want to do an RPG with you. You know, well, do you want it to be a little suspenseful? Sure. All right. Nobody buy anything. I'm going to go to Meijer and grab a Jenga tower.
Yeah. Now, there's also games that can be played with a deck of cards.
True. Yes, definitely.
So you've got Through the Breach by Weird Games.
Mm-hmm.
This is the tabletop version of their skirmish miniatures game called Malifaux. I'm a huge Malifaux fan. Unfortunately, we just don't play it anymore because nobody's really doing the miniature thing anymore, I think.
Well, yeah.
For now, anyways. But
actually, I'm wondering how quickly or how long it'll be before people start doing the tele miniatures, where the old Civil War guys and Rudimentary Wars, they would set up their own boards and then they would send their movements.
Oh, those, yeah, like you used to do in the 80s.
Mm-hmm. Or even earlier, with the bulletin board systems, where it used to actually send the file.
Either bulletin board systems or I've heard of people doing that by mail.
With BattleTech.
Yeah.
Yeah. Full movements in BattleTech, and some Warhammer did that.
Oh, I gotta wonder.
Original Warhammer. So please continue.
I gotta wonder about that. Okay, so anyways,
Into the Breach or Through the Breach.
Through the Breach by Weird Games. It's the tabletop role playing game version of their skirmish game Malifaux. It's a sort of a steampunky game.
It's like a group of, you got 5 minis or somewhere between 5 and 6 minis.
Yeah, you'll have a crew. It's usually between I would say probably 4 to 8.
Yeah.
Some crews have a lot of little minions, and some crews excel in just having a couple big champions.
Sure.
But yeah, it's played on a small table with a small number of minis, and all the mechanics are done with a deck of cards.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Malifaux typically uses a special deck, but it is just an artistically different deck than a regular playing card deck.
And you have your own deck. Even though our decks are the same, effectively.
Correct.
They just look different. My crew would have a certain look to it, but our decks really wouldn't change much.
Well, your decks are actually the same. Like I said, it is actually a 52 card, or 54 because it's got 2 jokers in it.
Right.
Deck of playing cards. Just like I said, if you get the official Malifaux decks, the suits are different, but there's still 4 suits.
Right.
And there's still, I think it's rams, crows, masks, and something else. But I mean, it's basically hearts, clubs, spades, and diamonds. So you can play it with a standard deck of cards. So what you do with those is every task has a target number to it, of course. Your character is going to have your various stats, and so when you want to make a test, you can either flip a card from the top of the deck and add it to your stat, and if it is high enough, you can you'll then have the ability to do it, or you'll have a handful of cards.
Okay.
And you can decide to cheat fate by just playing a card.
Swapping it out, if you will.
You know what you're going to get. Imagine, if this were dice, having 5d20 sitting in front of you.
Right.
With various numbers on them, and being able to choose instead to supplement one of your dice.
Well, it's like the one Diviners class that gives you 2 dice that you can submit in. Very similar.
Exactly. Works like the Diviner in D&D. Yes.
Right.
So you can cheat fate that way.
Right.
But of course, you only get a certain number of cards.
You're
in your
burning
hand.
out your hand, yeah.
And so you've got high cards, but you've also got low cards, and you don't get those high cards back until you've burned out all of your cards. So essentially, you have to throw some low cards in there, either to accept a failure or
skim by
on really cheap rolls. This is pretty much a gimme,
right?
And I can do it with a 2 because I'm good enough,
right.
Another one that works with cards, although it is it's a special deck that comes with the system, because there's special suits and it's not 52 cards; it's a lot more.
Yeah,
is Dragonlance 5th Age?
Yes,
I ran an entire campaign on Dragonlance 5th Age.
Really?
Yes, it was amazing.
Okay.
It has, like I said, specialized cards.
Right.
Specialized artwork on them.
Mm-hmm.
There's like 9 different suits.
Oh, Lord.
There's 8 for each one of the attributes.
Okay.
And then a 9th one, which is dragons, and that's more like your calamity suit.
Okay.
Okay, so that's where I rolled a 1 botch sort of thing.
Sure.
It's interesting because you're at the level of your character.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and this was produced by TSR, so this
Oh,
is
yeah,
actually,
back in the
this
day,
is an official D&D product. You know?
Right.
So you, depending on the level of your character, it depends on how many cards you have in hand.
Right.
Okay. When you want to do an action, it depends on what attribute that action is based upon.
Okay.
So, for instance, just use a simple strength check. I'm going to try to lift something heavy.
Sure.
Okay. So I'm going to take my strength attribute, and I'm going to take 1 card from my hand, and I'm going to throw it and add my strength attribute to its numerical value.
Okay.
Okay. So that gives me my total.
Mm-hmm.
So if I have a 5 strength and I threw a 5, I have a 10 total. Now, if the card I threw was a sword, which is the suit of strength, that's trump for strength checks. So I then take the top card from the draw deck and flip it over and add that.
Oh.
And if that's a sword, I flip another card and add that. And if that's a sword, I have seen someone pull a 36.
Because it just kept flipping. So like a super crit.
Yes,
Yeah.
a super crit.
Nice.
Just kind of like you've seen someone roll a 72 on 2 dice in 7th Sea.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was the exact version of that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
They just pulled a bunch of orbs all in a row.
Yep.
And then the dragons come in, where if you finish on a dragon, whether it's because you threw it or because you flipped it, and you did not succeed, that's a botch. If you succeed, it's fine.
And then something happens.
But then something bad happens. But some real interesting mechanics there, and two, like those are also your hit points. So if you are dealt damage, you have to discard numerical values up to the amount of damage you were dealt. So it removes options from you, which is a real interesting mechanic because it's one of the only, I think probably the only D&D system that incorporates a debilitation mechanic into hit point loss.
That's true.
Everything else, even at 1 hit point, you are fully capable of fighting.
Yeah, which is, I mean, it's simpler.
It's simpler.
But there are, I mean, if you go into D&D's finer mechanics, there are all kinds of gritty things that they threw in that you could definitely roll into.
Oh, you could.
And make it more, and I think there are some stuff related to exhaustion and crippling that are in there as far as the gritty stuff goes, but really have to push it in. It's obviously not default.
Yeah, it's not core rules, and I think it's even like in the alternate section of the DM's guide.
Yeah, whereas like 7C has it part of its death spiral is its crippling effect.
Yeah, absolutely. So, once you get half of your resolve is gone, or half of your dramatic wounds.
Half of your dramatic wounds, yeah.
Half of your dramatic wounds, your dice no longer explode.
Well, that's the thing, is in 6th when they bumped from 1st to 2nd edition, they changed the spiral and what happens, and basically you get better as things get more dangerous, things get different.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
So, but in the original system, yeah, basically your dice no longer explode, and then, other things start crippling you down from there, and you take losses, and it gets bad. It gets bad.
Whereas in 2nd edition, it's like you get backed into a corner, and now you're pulling
It's Inigo Montoya.
Yeah, you're pulling aces out your sleeve.
Yeah, but you're dying still.
There is a game we've mentioned a handful of times on here, Amber, which is entirely diceless.
Amber.
Entirely everythingless.
Yeah.
There's no.
I'd really love to know if there is anyone in our listening group, anyone under the age of, let's be honest, 30. Anyone under the age of 30 who's played Amber.
Yeah.
And I'd like to know anyone in our group who's played Amber and ended their last Amber game in an enjoyable state. Like, that was great. I would love to do that again.
Here's a little tidbit about Amber, too. I was today years old when I learned that Eric Woodchick made Amber.
Yeah.
I did not know. He's the same guy that wrote a lot of the Palladium properties that you and I love.
He did. And there are definite connections.
Yeah,
if you look through.
Once I learned that, I was like, "Oh, that makes sense."
Yeah. No loss there, Hulavu. No loss.
That makes so much sense now.
Yeah, no loss there. I don't expect many because it had a peak at a certain time, but only in certain circles with certain people. Like, it really didn't, like, unless you knew somebody who was part of that mind frame, you never even knew about it. So.
Now, here's an interesting one for you. I found one last game. It's called Macabre Tales by Spectrum Games.
Interesting.
Yeah, and it uses dominoes.
That sounds fantastic.
Now, here's the cool thing about dominoes,
Yeah.
is that dominoes are essentially just 2d6.
Yes.
But if you're using dominoes, you have specific, discrete pairs of 2d6 on them.
Yeah.
And so you can use... It's like having 2d6 without... as cards.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Mm-hmm.
So... it could be interesting. Could be interesting. If you don't have dice, but you do have dominoes, you still have 2d6.
That's, well, depends on the domino sets that you have, because
True.
there are some. Yeah, that could be interesting. I could also see someone creating a mahjong set, a fantasy-themed mahjong set.
That could be interesting. That could be real interesting, yeah.
Because now you've got a whole nother element that's layered on top of that.
That's kind of what this Adventurer's Tarot is.
It sort of is, to
Only
a degree.
Instead of tiles, it's cards.
Yeah.
You know, but
So.
it's imagery.
Oh,
it's
yeah.
names.
Yep,
You know,
yep.
they're
It's-
symbols.
Yep, very much so. All right, so let's now bring it around a little bit.
All right, so yeah, we talked a whole hell of a lot about
So when we
systems.
When we talk about dice, we're talking about adding an element of random or fate, whatever you want to call it, into the story. A threshold of success, of conquering something or achieving something. And so when we're talking about that, we're also talking in mathematics terms probability and risk.
Yeah.
I think those are the two real things that come out of it. I mean, obviously with like a Jenga tower, your risk is it falling.
Yeah.
Your own, but at the same time, it's not, your probability goes down as tiles get pulled. It is not a straight probability because things change constantly on it. And can make that probability weaker or stronger.
And even the skill of the person manipulating the tower at the time is a factor. Like, dice rolling is just dice rolling.
Somebody farting in the room can change the probability of the tower. Like,
Yes.
there is literally any number of things that go on to that. I mean, you could say the same thing about dice rolling across the table, that it's the surface, that it's the tile of dice, things like that. But I swear that the probability numbers go way up on a Jenga tower.
Oh yeah. But the important thing to note about any sort of alternate system, well, really any system in general, including dice, okay, including when you're rolling, multiple dice or different sides of dice and stuff like that, is to, and I warned you there was going to be math, to understand the probability.
Yes.
Okay.
I'm not good at this. I'm just saying that.
I'm actually pretty good about this, which is why
That's
I played
great.
craps when I went to Vegas.
I play craps too, but I know the system. I don't know the probabilities.
Oh yeah.
Like I play safe and I play to win.
Yeah.
I don't play for and then once I'm at my point, after I've made back what I threw on the table, I'm playing with their money. Now it's just pure entertainment at this point.
Yep.
Enjoy it as much as you want.
I made enough to buy dinner tonight at the nice restaurant. Let's go.
Yeah. Exactly. So.
But the important thing is to understand the probability behind things. So when you roll a die, you have basically a 1 in however many sides. We'll use a d22 to explain this metaphor.
Sure.
So you have a 1 in 20 chance of getting any one of those numbers. Okay. Now, anytime you roll that die, it's always a 1 in 20 chance.
Correct.
Of any of those numbers happening.
Right.
So rolling it 5 times doesn't change the probability of that or anything like that.
Right.
Okay. So
the only thing that you have on a 20-sided die that really focuses the probability is the fact that the numbers are 1 through 20. But other than that, there's no, because you're not combining it with anything. It is a straight single roll. It is a single probability.
It is just as likely to roll a 7 or a 1 as it is to roll a 20 or a 16.
Right.
Or anything like that.
Whereas if you're some of the games that, start with you always roll 2d6 and add your value. Now you're rolling 2 dice that have 6 values. What is the odds that you're going to get a value over a certain threshold? Now
1 in 36, but different combinations make numbers.
Correct.
So 7 is a 1 in 6 chance. whereas a 2 or a 12 is a 1 in 36 chance.
Right.
And everything else in between there. So it starts getting a lot more complex in between there. And like I said, we're not going to go through the hard numbers on it.
we're not.
But you understand that that's the sort of thing you end up with dice.
Yes, very much so.
But again, with dice, anytime you roll them, you have those chances.
Correct.
Rolling them multiple times in a row does not change those chances.
And also, when you're dealing with dice, you don't traditionally work with diminishing returns. You're never reducing the number of dice that you have, unless you're getting advantages or disadvantages and things like that, which do some alteration to that.
The term that they use in probabilistic, mathematics and stuff like that is without replacement.
Yes.
Okay. So, for instance, we talked about cards as a mechanic.
Yes.
And how when you throw away your good cards, all you have left is your bad cards.
Right.
So that is a randomization system without replacement. Okay. So, if we're playing with a deck of cards and I throw the King of Hearts, the King of Hearts is gone until it gets shuffled back in.
Right.
Okay. So now, any other card has a 1 in 51 chance and an absolutely 0% chance of being the King of Hearts.
Right.
At that point, all of your probabilities change.
Yeah.
And so, with any subset of that group, like I said, maybe a deck of a hand of 13 cards on my half,
Okay.
that has some low cards, some medium cards, and some high cards. Even if I'm drawing those randomly, I'm not getting my high ones back until the rest of them are gone.
Yes. Okay.
So you do end up with what we call as diminishing returns. And it can alter the game, because you can be left in a situation where you cannot produce a good result. You cannot succeed.
You have to you have to accept a failure.
All I've got left in my hand is a 2 and a 3.
That's
and I need at least a 7 to succeed here.
Yep.
So I throw the 3 or I throw the 2 or whatever, because knowing that it's going to suck, and I just have to accept it.
Yep.
What this does for you, though, is this allows for a forced system of ups and downs. Okay. We've all played games where your dice are either hot that night, or what sucks even more is when your dice aren't hot that night.
Right.
I remember one night we were playing my game, our rogue couldn't roll above a 4 on a d20.
It was terrible.
It was absolutely terrible. So when you're dealing with things like that, where you do have guaranteed highs and lows mixed in, you know what you're going to get. You know at least some of your things are going to be amazing.
Yeah.
You also know some of your things are going to suck.
Right.
And it's up to you, really, where you want to mix those sort of things in.
Right.
All right, so there's cards.
Right.
We talked about Jenga towers.
So we talk about dice. We know we have a certain level of probability, and again, no diminishing. With cards, we have diminishing. I think the one thing that we haven't talked about is kind of skillful things, and that's where I'm going to step us just for a moment away from this, and that is LARPing.
Oh, yeah.
Where in LARP, there is no dice. In some cases, it's contact. It's literally skill versus skill, right? Hey, whether or not I can hit you with a ball, a spell packet, whatever.
Lightning bolt.
Exactly. Or if I can hit you with a sword around the shield that you're carrying, right? Or if that even matters. Some of the games, bashing damage includes the shield. If I make contact with you in any way, I am bashing.
Yeah.
Or you have things like Vampire.
Yeah.
Where you had, gestures. You had rock, paper, scissors.
Rock, paper, scissors.
That was a way to do it. And that is a game of skill to a degree.
Boulder, parchment, shears.
That's right. And then you also had things that added on top of that, that trumped certain activities and weights. So you were still adding a character's level of skill on top of a game of chance/skill.
Right.
And that's where things get different. Because, again, your probability is there, without a doubt, but it's also a matter of being a little cunning as well and knowing when you can do that. So I think you're moving it from the far end of the spectrum of true probability and fate to a point of this is on me.
Yeah. There's a bit of a mind game to that too.
Very much
so. Psyching the other person out. In specifically the Vampire LARP, and I don't know, I don't know what the recent, the most recent rules
neither do I,
system looks like. But when I played it back in college, the system had rock, paper, scissors, but there was also, if you had certain abilities, would give you the bomb.
Yes.
And the bomb was a fourth throw you could make, which was a closed fist with a thumbs up to represent the wick. And it would beat scissors, it would destroy paper and rock, but scissors could snip the wick on it.
Right.
And you would have to declare it when you were making a check. If you had the bomb, you would have to say, okay, we're going to test, I have the bomb. Now here's the thing, you don't have to throw the bomb.
No.
But just looking the person in the eye and saying, I have the bomb, now makes them go, oh crap.
Right.
Now are they going to throw it? Like, they declared it.
Right.
Should I throw scissors now because that's the only thing that beats the bomb? Are they just going to throw a rock now because that beats scissors?
Right.
Thinking that I'm going to throw scissors because they declared,
Yeah, exactly.
And the mind games begin.
Which is a chunk of Vampire within itself.
Oh, it is.
So I think it added a level of difference to it.
It did.
So
I thought it was great, honestly.
But
and you don't have to carry around dice or any other like physical tool to resolve things.
Right. And so my thought is that segueing us into the next section is, what does that do to the gameplay of the system? So now, you could have used a card system just as easily, or any number of other physical systems that are portable.
Sure.
Beyond dice. But why rock, paper, scissors? How does that change what Vampire is on a connection? Because if number one, it takes contact out of it. I don't have to make contact with you. You don't have to make contact with me. So that's good for any good LARP.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
But it's still a challenge. It puts challenge back into it. It puts wits against wits. It puts, whether or not you're going to accept what I'm about to do, or you're going to challenge me and add weight to your conversation.
And honestly, it's probably the easiest and most simple and accessible randomization possible.
Yeah.
I mean, how many times have you and a buddy been going to the car and both called shotgun at the same time?
Right.
And then all of a sudden you're like, oh, I'll match you for it. Oh, darn,
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, we just did that.
Exactly. He threw scissors, I threw paper.
Yep.
So he gets to ride shotgun, and I get to ride bitch. But I digress. But it's still the most simple form and probably the most accessible form of randomization out there.
Right, but what does it do? How does it make you feel when you're playing that game? How does that mechanic change the game? I would say it adds an element of person to person. It is no longer the dice making the decisions. It is no longer that. It is now me challenging you, or you challenging me. It is very personal, and that game is very personal, so it helps add to the ambiance of it, that if I walk into a room and someone comes over and challenges me, it looks like a physical contact the moment that we come up to each other, right? Mm-hmm. And there is a physical interaction that's occurring. So now I'm challenging you with what I'm doing. Or people are obfuscating and stepping out, or stepping into the umbra, whatever. They're physically making actions that change the course of it. So in that, it still keeps it a physical, connective game. That has tension, that has action, that has reaction.
Has a person-to-person connection.
Yeah.
And,
And so for that, any game that would give you those mechanics definitely add weight to that.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and it's smooth, too.
Relatively. I think there's some...
How long does it take you to go, okay, let's check?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's it,
Yeah. I think there's a certain sense of cheapness with some people who do it, but
there are.
We'll digress away from that. So,
there's another LARP mechanic that came to mind when I was thinking about this too.
What's that?
So you and I both played a fantasy LARP called Kanar.
We did.
And I remember that there was a mechanic when you were resurrecting people.
Oh, the
marbles.
The marbles. The bags of marbles. That's actually used in some other games.
Yep.
I haven't heard about that one in forever, and it's the number of marbles that go in gives you whether or not you succeed or failure.
So if I'm remembering it correctly, it's like 10 white marbles in the bag by default. And then every time your character has died, one of those white marbles gets replaced with a black marble.
Correct.
And then after you have performed the whole resurrection ritual and expended the resources for it, you then draw a marble. And if it's a black one, it fails. Mm-hmm. And you need to try it again. And I couldn't remember... Do you remember if the... if failing the ritual puts another black marble in there?
If I remember correctly, it did.
So yeah, it actually hurts the soul to fail to resurrect it. Makes it harder and harder and harder. So there was resurrection, but there was a certain point at which the diminishing returns made your character's death permanent.
Yeah.
And I really loved that mechanic. And it was just as simple as again, just, probability with replacement. You dip your hand into a bag of marbles and you just draw one without looking, and you accept that outcome,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Simple probability to manipulate, too, because it's 10 marbles, it's 10% chance for anything. So...
Yeah, I mean, it's what it is.
You had a couple other ones down here, like drawing straws and stuff with that? Like,
yeah.
Have you ever seen that in a game sense, though? I mean, like...
I have.
Okay, tell me some stories here, because I was curious when you jotted those down.
So I saw it at a convention, actually, and it was a game that was very light.
Okay.
It was basically a game about you're playing a chibi, basically, in a small town.
This is Big Eye Small Mouth?
Kind of thing. And you were your success rate was based upon the chi of the town, which were all of these sticks that were different lengths.
Okay.
And all came to a cap. And so whenever you did something, you pulled a stick.
Mm-hmm.
And then you compared it to the challenge.
Oh.
To see how successful or how much you failed. And then that would change the chi of the town the next time around.
So what you're saying is this whole game was nothing more than a stick measuring contest?
Pretty much. But again, in the cutest sense of the word, and so you basically you'd then do the scenario.
Oh, that's
like
cool.
They would lay out, this is the challenge for the scenario because I built it up this way. Okay, let's see how well we do. And you always knew that there were so many long ones and so many short ones to make it up.
Right.
Well, the neat part about that game, if I remember correctly, was that the chi was a total length.
Okay.
You could use whatever sticks, you could put whatever sticks you wanted in there. Mm-hmm. So you could do a whole bunch of little sticks to make the chi of the town, so everybody had, so that the odds were more even.
Okay.
But there were still chances for longs and shorts, because you had to put so many longs and so many shorts in.
Uh-huh.
Or you could just do long, and then now you just got the short, so you know exactly what it's going to be. So you could alter the states, but it was all dependent on day to day, the day of the change. So it was just a neat system. It was different,
cool.
but it was very story based. It was very story based.
Yeah.
So,
you've also got like scatter and throw bones.
So I've never seen it.
Okay.
But there's a game that uses a sheet or a page that has a circle on it and zones on it.
Okay.
And you drop onto the board 5 pieces.
Okay.
And based on where they fall, that is the success and failure. So if it's a combat encounter, obviously you're trying to drop in a certain area, but they're going to scatter.
Interesting.
Now, that I saw done more effectively in a kind of LARP sense. We did a game at Gen Con where the combat that they did was you'd have your weapon or your spell as basically like a pog almost.
Okay.
And you'd slide it down a shuffleboard at a target.
Oh.
And the thing was a giant board with little circles on it, and like this was worth 5, this is worth 10, this is a critical
everything
hit.
about this. Combat skee ball.
Yeah, that's exactly what it was. But
shuffleboard,
but everybody would do it. So you could knock other people's into things, into zones, or knock them out of it, but you were working as a group to defeat a monster.
Were your support characters with brooms down there, sweeping in front of it?
No,
or,
a lot of times your support characters were spending things to keep you alive during the encounter because there were other things that happened as the shuffles happened, because it was technically a live room while you were doing it.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So it was neat. It was very different way of doing it, but I liked the shuffleboard technique because the one thing that it did that I thought I didn't think about till later was this gave people of any physical quality the ability level in the playing field. We're all just shuffling down a table. That's it. So I could be in a wheelchair, I could be standing upright, didn't matter.
Sure.
I'm at the table, I can work it.
Sure.
I can use a device if I need to help me get it down there. It just changed, and it was quick. You weren't losing dice. You weren't trying to read numbers. It was, did my pog make it down there?
Right.
And land in the circle. That was it.
That's real interesting, actually.
Yeah.
It's real interesting. So to sum up a little bit about the about what we've talked about tonight. So there's a lot of different systems out there. Most of these systems are built directly into the game system. But I'm sure if you know your way around different systems of randomization, cards and whatnot, you could probably do some really interesting things on the fly. You could probably play D&D with a deck of cards or a tarot deck or something like that.
Yeah.
Pretty easily, but you need to understand how the probability works behind it. At least on the surface, you need a rough understanding of it, and also give some thought to how the randomization system that you're using feels within the scope of the game.
Yes.
And that was kind of, I think, the one thing we didn't really touch on tonight was that, there are certain dice systems or certain randomization systems that are going to skew very heavily towards failure. We talked a bit about that when we were talking about World of Darkness. Things were...
I think that if you have a situation where, if it skews more toward failure, your players know they're going to fail. I think the Jenga and Dread kind of skews itself toward a level of failure.
Oh, it does.
Or an imminent failure.
Dread's its own thing, but I'll get to that in a second,
But that's the extreme example.
Yeah.
That pushes that, but it gives you the
I'm thinking more
feeling.
like World of Darkness, where, the more dice you throw, actually, the more unwieldy it gets, because you have a greater sense of, a greater chance for failure then. And those are systems you're going to want to employ for things that are more horror based, I suppose. Where a successful outcome is not guaranteed, and where failure is going to be something commonplace.
Yes.
On the other hand, if you're using a randomization system that skews heavily towards success, you may want to use that for a heroic story where the good guys always win.
Right. Exactly.
Success is kind of assumed,
but
sometimes
like
you'll
the
fail,
7C
and that
game.
might be interesting.
Yeah, like a 7C game. I think that's another perfect example of leaning into that direction. So.
And also that the randomization system uses or enhances the feel in a certain way. So, for instance, Deadlands, would be played with cards and chips.
Yes.
It's also the new version of it is played with the Savage Worlds system.
Right.
So that's where your cards and your chips come in.
Right.
But again, it lends itself to that gambling thing, the poker thing, the Wild West thing.
Yeah.
So it enhances that feel already when you've got a deck of cards and a stack of poker chips in front of you. You're already kind of feeling Wild Westy.
Yeah, and it continues that feel. And there's no reason why you can't pause a mechanic in a specific game like D&D and shift to that mechanic for a specific scene.
Absolutely.
Especially
if you need a certain mechanic,
Exactly.
And then, I love to fangirl over Dread. Because not only is it a great system for diminishing returns, where failure is inevitable and disastrous when it happens, because every single pull from that tower you makes it more unsturdy. And you know what the end result's going to be.
Indeed.
But also, everyone can see it. And it is just sitting there in the middle of the table, everyone looking at it, watching it sway when somebody's pulling a block out of it. And, I mean, it's right there in the name, Dread.
Yeah. Yep.
So,
do you want to get into questions?
Let's get into some questions. Yeah.
All right. I'm actually going to step away for just a second while you're asking that first question.
All right. We will start off with Knox in a Box. So Knox in a Box asks, are there any games that decide things via a lottery-type mechanic, like those tumblers with the textless colored balls? I am not aware of any games that lean on that directly as a mechanic, but you know what? You absolutely could. And the great thing about that would be that you could determine what the colored balls mean. You could determine how many of each you want to put in. So if you want to skew very heavily, say, towards success, you could put in a lot of green balls and maybe a few red balls.
Well, I think, let's go back to Canar. That was two-color system, and that was a pass-fail situation. But again, I think that fits within this mechanic.
Yeah.
But I could easily see... I could easily see a system that gives you a secondary benefit. So, for instance, if you had pass-fail, critically succeed, you could do that. And again, that weights it in that direction without a doubt.
Yeah, adds a third color in there, and maybe out of 20, you've got one.
Right.
It's a golden ball or something like that,
Right. And or
a black one that means, critical failure.
Well, there's nothing to say also that that your scenes can't dictate that as well. Like as you're losing energy, things are being removed.
That's true.
Or your fatigue is adding pieces into it.
Very true.
So you could easily do that with the system.
I'd be excited to see
I could see a mountain climbing game that did that.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. You change the probabilities at any given time by pulling or adding certain things out of the randomization pool and then working with that.
Yep.
Yeah, you could do a lot of stuff with that. You could do a lot of really cool stuff with that.
Yeah, I would totally think so.
Okay.
The Mad Elf asks, playing cards, Jenga towers, rock, paper, scissors, lizard, Spock, bidding points, costing tokens, buffers, straight comparison, static numbers. So many options. Which are ones that you enjoy the most and why? I think it really came down to the feeling of the story and where I was at. Like, boffer fighting was fun because it was athletic.
Yeah.
It was something to do that. But I didn't need to do that all the time in a LARP. Most of the time it was conversation more than anything else. The next piece beyond that then is how do you deal with either a static number system like a card system, which I would consider a static number system, or straight comparison system, which I guess you could say is still skill-based with the rock, paper, scissors, or coin tosses. I have a little more issue with those, just because they are exceptionally confrontational, almost feeling more confrontational than combat.
Yeah.
Like physical boffer combat. But like the Jenga tower, just thinking about playing a game around that is a stress in my head, and that is not something I need right now, like in 2020.
But that means it's doing its job, though.
Exactly. It's leading right there. But I think the cards are neat. I think it's a different system. It's cool.
I'm excited.
The Malifaux cards specifically, like that kind of a system is neat.
Yeah, I really like it where it's like, I could flip from the deck, but you know what? I want to assure success here, so I'm going to throw the 10 out of my hand.
Yeah.
And we're just going to deal with the consequences of that one later.
Yeah.
That's a problem for future me.
That's a fight on sight.
Yeah, I think probably of the non-dice systems I've seen, LARP always holds a special place in my heart, because I do enjoy the battle for combat, but again, probably because it's athletic, and honestly, I'm older now, and I hurt. I get into the point where I just hurt now, so I don't think the battle for combat would be as great for me anymore. But the cards, I think from Through the Breach probably win it for me.
Okay, that's fair. That's fair.
And I'm excited to see how Savage World plays out.
Yeah.
I've been doing some looking into it. I haven't actually played it yet, but we'll get there.
Yeah. I would say the playing cards are which one of the reasons why I went in on the Kickstarter.
Oh yeah.
For this, I'm interested to try and use this in different systems.
Absolutely.
And see how it plays through.
I'm gonna take this right home, and I'm gonna definitely read up on it and see what we can do with it.
Yeah. So we got plenty more than enough time for the last one. So
yeah, our last question. Lots of alternate systems are either. Oh, sorry, this is Overwatch. Asks us. Lots of alternate systems are either gimmicks or used to change the feel to suit a particular game atmosphere. But what about alternate systems out of necessity? Things like prison spinners for contraband D&D, or dice alternatives when a pop-up tabletop RPG happens on the road. What's a good, robust, everyday alternative system when platonic solids, great term, simply aren't an option? That's an excellent point about playing D&D in like a prison environment. I know that's a thing that's been happening, and I'm not sure that dice are really a thing that that prisoners are allowed to have.
Cards are still very much allowed. So that always gives a good piece there. I think there was a little bit of a discussion about that, and I can't remember. There was an article that discussed it, and they lightly glazed over the random factor and what they used. But they can't even get electronic things like using it off of like phones or anything because they're not allowed phones.
Sure.
Or anything like that. So I would say for me, cards are the best alternative there.
Cards are probably the best alternative. I think, like, especially if you're playing D&D 5th edition, which you could do. So, like, cards, you're going to be essentially 1 through 13 in any given suit. So what you could probably do is give each player a whole suit.
Yes.
1 through 13. And then moderate or modulate your target numbers lower by like 5. Five or maybe as much as 10. And then random draw a card. And with replacement, so you'd always put it back afterwards. And that would give you a 1 through 13 randomization. And then add that to your skill check. You know? It's essentially a D20 roll minus 7.
Yeah.
So
I mean, you could do colored stones just as easily.
You could.
Or marked stones.
You could, but the problem with that is that marked stones are... the reason dice work is because all sides are equal.
It's uniform.
Uniform,
no, and I mean picking stones.
Oh, okay, yeah,
You could do something like that, or marbles.
Yeah, you could random pick stones.
Yeah, or marbles would be better because they're uniform.
Out of some sort of a bag that you can't see.
Hat or something, yeah.
Yeah, sure.
Sure.
Or honestly, you know, I mean, if it really comes down to it, look, if the narrative is more important to you than the actual outcome of the game mechanics, just go with the rock, paper, scissors.
Yeah.
You know, give the benefit of the doubt to the person. You know, if it's an especially hard challenge, maybe they have to beat you 2 out of 3.
Yeah.
Or 5 out of 7.
But I would honestly say, like, if I was going to be going on the road with enough people where the chance of a game would be coming up, I'd probably bring 2 decks of cards. I'd probably go that as my go-to. I mean, 9 times out of 10, I'll throw a pack of dice in just because. Because why not? You know, dice are small. But I think if we didn't have the dice to work with, I think cards would be a good, solid alternative.
Sure.
So at least that would be mine.
All right. Well, I think that's just for questions for us.
I think one of the things that interested me most about talking about this topic was it was something we don't do very often.
Yeah, it really isn't.
So,
like you and I are, I mean, we're pretty mired in dice systems. We loves us some clickety clackety math rocks.
Oh, thanks, Knox. He actually just put in the article about
just saw that.
The tabletop in prisons.
I posted that to live chat. It's a whole article on Vice.com about how tabletop RPGs are played in prisons. Yeah,
that's fantastic. I mean, awesome. I guess you could do origami paper dice. I would question your origami skills.
I could.
You think you could make origami dice?
I can make 6-siders. Yeah.
Well, I mean, 6-siders. 4-siders.
I can't do anything else, but I can do origami 6-siders. I don't know that.
They would. I think with the right paper, you'd probably be okay.
Yeah, sure.
So, next week we're actually going to revisit. Actually, I would say our storytelling styles.
Yeah, it was a topic we've covered in the past, but I think it's worth talking about again, especially given that we've got a broader knowledge. I think now.
Yeah,
and we've got some new listeners and stuff like that who may not be going through our old past catalog and whatnot.
Exactly.
But yeah, we're going to talk about different styles of storytelling. Just from the standpoint of people who lean more into the numbers, people who lean more into the narrative, people who lean more into the theatrics. And how to tell the different styles of stories. Using those.
And we're not saying that. I mean, systems lean to a certain style, but it does not make it so. And we'll kind of be, gracing the idea that you can take any existing system and make it a style. You can make a D&D game feel like a narrative, what was the term that I was going for? Gumshoe kind of story, Or you can go into Shadowrun and make it a dungeon crawl.
Yeah.
And make it gritty and harsh, which it already is pretty much. I think it's a fun topic, and we've gone around the board enough times that it'll probably be good to come back to it a little bit.
Yeah.
And then we've got a mini series coming up after that isn't so mini. It's actually probably going to take us to the end of the year.
We had a really productive meeting the other day where we came up with a lot of the future show topics and stuff like that. So, anyways, we will catch you next week. You can catch us on Twitter at @ST_Conclave, on Instagram at @ST_Conclave. Listen to us live every Wednesday night at 7 p.m. Eastern Time on mixlr.com/storyteller-conclave. And join us on Discord. You can find the link up on our website at storytellerconclave.com. Or up on our Twitter. We post it every single time, every week when we post up there as well.
We'd like to thank our Patreon members, Knox in the Box, Sam, and the Arcane Asylum. We really appreciate all of you and everything you guys do to help support our show and the rest of our Patreon members. Our pre-show music is by Arcane Anthems. You can find that at patreon.com/arcaneanthems. They are fantastic and free as well, but we always want to support them, and we do. The intro music you heard is Beyond the Warriors by Geefrog. You can find that at geefrogmusic.weebly.com. Our outro music, which you're hearing now, is Only Our Footprints in the Sand by Midair Machine. You can find that at soundcloud.com/midairmachine/tracks.
As always, we want to thank our families, Vicky and Sean. Thank you so much for helping us out
you.
with this all the time. Our friends who've sat with us at our tables throughout the years, and all of you, every one of our listeners. We love you all.
Love you guys.
Stay safe.
Good night.
Good night.